Hi, everyone. My name is Flavia. I've been a software engineer at a company called FundApps for the past 5 years. And I love support. And I love talking about support, which is quite an odd thing. I appreciate that. But I hope that you will get to enjoy support with me as we're going through this journey. So we're going to crack on and talk a little bit about that journey.
PagerDuty $.
How many of you recognize the sound that you just heard? A few of you, that's good. For those of you who don't know what I'm sharing, it's basically the most infamous sound alarm that you can find in an on-call third-party software that you use when you are on call. So for every person in this room that has ever been on call, this sound might trigger a PTSD effect or an inquisitive call to adventure. To me, this sound reminds me of a difficult time during the pandemic when I'd be woken up at 2 in the morning, feeling sorry for myself and my partner, who had to be reminded yet again that there are very few moments one can enjoy life, even at night. Well, depending on your flashbacks, you might find the next hour hard for you to digest or not. As I'm handing in the invitation to reminisce on those times that you're on call for your organization. And hang on to those feelings and questions that those late hours were getting into your head. Did anyone else respond to this call? Do you really need to wake up? Would anyone notice if I just turn off my phone? During those hours, I would start my nocturnal crafts, trying to bargain with this invisible power to convince it really that there is no need for me to wake up. I thought we fixed this issue last week. Are there any tests in this area? I should have paid more attention to the handover on Monday. Are there any docs on how to fix this issue? Why do we have an S3 bucket called snoring raccoons? Regardless of how many times I would fight this negotiation in my head, the inner responsibility would win, and I would get my head into the game. But don't get me wrong, I always like to get my full 8 hours of sleep. But it was particularly painful to log into our monitoring platform to realize that there are no magic monitors to lead me to the bottom of my problem. The thought alone that we have so many business cases that we couldn't have accounted for put me on edge. These were all symptoms of how ready my team and I were at the time to deal with severe anomalies in our system. I was about 6 months in when I was considering joining my support rota. And while my knowledge of over the domain improved over time, the rate at which we were growing from a product perspective made it very difficult to keep all that information in one person's head. The system felt unpredictable. I barely had enough domain knowledge over particular areas of the service. And the error messages felt so vague that I could barely decrypt what part of the system I should look into first. To be on support as an engineer means a lot of things. But at the end of the day, it means to be that friendly neighbor that you can pull in to answer a technical question, a domain question, and chase a design in the wild. For an outsider, it may look something like this. You react to a ticket that someone has actually put into your system. You try to replicate it with your personalized setup, whatever that is. Finally get to the fireworks part when you hopefully get to code a little bit and actually fix this issue. And lastly, you actually redistribute the fix through your deployment processes. But that wasn't my experience. Once I got into the gist of it, I realized that there are far more elements that need to be considered, and they all have a certain effect on our cycle. And so even before I joined my company support rota, I knew that it was going to be a bumpy road, as I was witnessing my colleagues transitioning from the good old days of support where inquiries would come sparsely once a day to streams of 4 to 5 queries a day, each negotiating higher-level urgency. In our worst days, we would see 3 to 4 critical changes spawning into our Slack channel, each alluding to a scenario that we haven't considered soon enough in the preliminary phases of our design. The curse of success, as I would like to call it, meant that we had to put our differences on the back burner. And for several years, deciding to focus on our product development came with a clear conscience that our supportability is good enough. And while we were still successful in fixing a lot of our issues, it wasn't always easy. As I was reminiscing on my journey at FundApps, I couldn't help but remember all those long hours of hard debugging, all those reverted merge requests, all those direct connections into client environments just to assess the behavior of a service in the wild. We knew that things could have gone better, but for the sake of expanding our range of products, we had to accept the practices as we had at the time and focus more towards product development. So what I'm about to share with you are some of the lessons that we have learned in the past half a decade of experimenting with support. But some of the decisions that you will learn about today may not be the decisions you might make in your shoes. The identity of our company has played a big role in our decisions, in our choices. So as a business-to-business company that has acted as a bootstrap since it's been founded, our revenue represents our lifeline. So some of the context and the choices that some of the context and the resources that we used at the time played a big role in those decisions. In the second part of the presentation, we're going to talk about the support practices that we picked up or never left us, regardless of how our team topology changed. But before we jump into that story, I think this is the best moment as ever to share with you what support represented for us across the years. Our responsibilities have taken many shapes, some of which I'm sure you are familiar with. But what may not be as visible is that the nature of our work makes our contractual agreements quite aggressive. The type of industry that we work in, regulatory compliance, means that our clients are working against the clock to meet certain regulatory deadlines. If our service is meant to be reliable enough that it could reduce the time necessary to investigate and report their investment holdings to the regulators. But if our service isn't reliable enough, our clients could fail to comply, miss the deadline, and potentially be fined millions and millions of pounds. And while our moral high ground as individuals may vary, and we are not legally responsible to pay for those fees, thank God, we have a reputation to maintain as a company. So let me share how that really translates in our everyday life. We would provide domain and technical context to the tickets raised by our client services team. We would provide debugging techniques for our regulatory team, who in exchange be responsible to translate regulatory memos to actual rules for our engine. We would use basic observability techniques such as logs and metrics that only got better through time through the shape of monitoring, observability, tracing, metadata, alarming, and so on. We would ensure that our revenue team can provide fail-proof demos to our prospects regardless of time and day. Lastly, we would be at the front line of our incident management zone. So for the people in the room who have a different definition of incident to mine, I'm going to share mine. An incident is a critical change that happens in one or more client environments in production. And while we may not be completely responsible to fix a breaking change, we are there to ensure that the relevant teams are aware there is an issue. And if necessary, we are there to provide a clear way to put that fix through the deployment pipelines. Fast forward to 2024, 2025, our responsibilities haven't changed that much. But with more than 50 engineers, 5 product teams, and an internal team to take care of, it is more important than ever that our support goals are clear in everyone's head. So I'm going to cover this in the second part of the presentation as well, but I want to share what I think are the most important takeaways for the presentation. Our first goal was to ensure that our product teams can get closer to product nirvana. So regardless of your technical question or product question, you came to support first, And if we cannot help you, we'll get you closer to a team that can give you an answer. Our second goal was to always leave things better than they were before. Something as small as improving a technical documentation with a suggestion that you may have not found as obvious could help someone save an hour of their time in the future. Every effort counts, and it builds towards the internal quality of your collaboration. Our third rule, our third goal, or better said rule, is to not assume that we're going to be the same team forever. Whoever will pick our responsibilities in the future should know how to get our solutions, how they should find our solutions and build on top of them, or at least use them to get an answer. And you may be listening to these points and wonder what's so special about them. Shouldn't they be a given when you're setting the grounds of a new team or of a new project? And I do hope that most of you think that way. But the truth is that when you are looking towards expanding your range of products, into expanding your business, it's very easy to get distracted by a lot of other things. Let me ask you a question instead. How do you define support? What are or should be the main responsibilities of that team? What feelings surface at the idea of being on support for more than a week? In fact, let's make a very quick experiment, and with a show of hands, tell us if you're part of the support organization in your company or if you're working with them on a regular basis. Now, what feelings are associated with that part of the organization? Perhaps your feelings associated with that part is burnout, stress, fear of not messing up. Perhaps you don't even want to think about this right now, because what you really care about is leadership, innovation, growth, or meeting some very ambitious company targets. There is no right answer. There is no perfect recipe. What worked for us may not work for you. I did want to share my definition of support, because I'm very proud of where we got. All that effort into client community, into demos, into feature development has been paying off, and we are finally in a position where we can set time aside to see how we can reliably scale to thousands of customers without drowning in hundreds of requests a week. For us, meant that we will look into our support practices. So for the rest of this talk, I'm gonna talk about a few of the experiments and the practices. Around 2021, we were getting in a position where we would kind of get the pace of things, and we wanted to even develop even more and more features. So we thought that the best way to actually experiment to see what features actually bring value to our customers is to use ShapeUp as a product methodology. How many of you have heard of it? Okay, a few of you. The concept between ShapeUp is to assign 6 weeks of development for a team to actually develop an iteration of a feature. And after 6 weeks, you determine, does the feature actually bring value to our clients or not? If it does, put it in another 6 weeks iteration. So we thought that our support team would benefit from the same synchronous cycle of being on support for 6 weeks. So we pulled 4 individuals from the main engineering team and put them in that pod. However, it didn't work that way. It was kind of a fiasco, and the team really felt burnt out, or they were distracted with far more things. But one thing that we did get out of that experiment, though, we realized that people really enjoy having a support buddy, to know that at the end of the week, if you have a lot of things going on, at least you have someone to share the responsibilities with. So a person would stay primary, frontline, making sure to keep that response time nice and low, and then secondary person would be staying second, having the context of the previous week. They would also have the context of having the context of the previous week, but also having the time to finish whatever has carried over. But more importantly, they would have the space and time to help the other person if things got out of hand. So we kept that, and even to these days, our main product is using that budding strategy. The rotational element of our methodologies represented a lot of things as well. It's also represented a tool for fairness. People can focus on different things for a while. A change of scenery, good or bad, it made you reflect. Do you like the type of work you're doing, the team you're in, the amount of work you're given? But it also represented a tool for fairness. Whether you enjoyed being on support or not, it at least give everyone a chance to get exposed to different parts of the system that they haven't had a chance to work with before. It gave everyone the chance to exercise their autonomy and ownership skills, and that was particularly important if the engineering culture was suffering at times from the so infamously called hero culture. Let me give you some context. Do people know what I mean by RCAs, root cause analysis? Those type of meetings that you have in the aftermath of an incident to surface the highest level cause of a problem. So from where I was standing, I would see in these meetings this unspoken point on the table. The quality of our incident management was directly proportional to whether the individual who had the most context of the faulty service was in the proverbial room or not. Having them online meant that someone had the intricacies of the faulty service, the intricacy of the product in their head, and they could steer us away from the lighthouse. But if that person didn't happen to be online or available at the time, it would take us significantly longer to reach a resolution. It was one of those times where we weren't aware that we are promoting a hero culture, or differently known knowledge silos. So shifting our responsibilities from one person or another really helped us. It gave us the chance to really exercise our philosophy. Our philosophy is good is better than perfect. So working with this imperfect system, with its tech debt, with its quirks, is a privilege for those individuals who may not so naturally seek the spotlight in the organization. So over time, the knowledge of a conglomerate slowly dissipated into every individual's head, and we finally filled in the cracks in our foundation. As we picked up the rhythm and we were finally more happy with how we were dealing with our support, we finally got into a position where we got more successful in selling our product. So we got appetite. We got appetite for more features, more product services, more risk. So our roadmap at around 2022 was soaking in creative juices from product managers and subject matter experts and our most loyal customers. So naturally, after a while, we shifted our focus from mastering our main product into specializing into different financial sectors. That meant, after a while, it felt unfair that every engineer should hold the context of the entire code base in their head if they're setting the foundations of a new service. So we decided to divide our responsibilities into so-called product teams, which we determined contain ownership of a particular category of work, and that the rest of the teams will have their own support rota. So out of 40 engineers that we were at the time, 20 were set to create new value for our customers, and the rest stayed to improve the foundation. But that wasn't necessarily enough. Once we specialized into different financial sectors, we also thought that we would benefit from supporting our product, our core product, based on our skill sets. So if you were one of the 5 front-end engineers in the team at the time, we would decide you're going to be on support every 5 weeks, which was quite a change from what they were used to, but it was not unprecedented. Bear in mind that our customer base was still growing, and as it comes with the nature of business-to-business software as FundApps is, every single client implementation would really affect the support load in our organization. At the same time, while we were developing new services, the main team was looking to modernize our architecture, and our front-end team was looking to actually build a completely new navigation system for our user interface. At the time, a lot of our clients were growing concerned of our slow progress of our feature development. And although we were still doing it, it was not enough for them. But much harder to admit, at the same time, a lot of the clients were facing bugs in our most critical parts of our service. And we had to join more client calls in that time than we are ready to admit. But let's take a step back. Not only our engineering team split into half, but we are also split into subcategories, and now we are expected to modernize our architecture, but also develop a new user interface and build new features, and also work with concerned clients. It doesn't take an expert to notice that all of these decisions at once were risky, but we thought it's the best bet we have at the time. So a lot of my colleagues were reluctantly accepting our plans, but they knew that what was coming was not going to be easy. The symptoms of such a frequent context switch were growing more and more visible. Tickets were being picked up but left untracked for weeks on end. Handovers would be often overlooked in favor of actually carrying over with the work that they're doing instead of rejoining one's team. And even with that commendable attitude in mind, documentation was desired but often overlooked in favor of actually rejoining one's team. A lot of non-functional items were left out because people couldn't afford having a person out of their team more than a week. At the same time, people were expected to take breaks, go on holiday, take part in the hiring process, use their learning budget, or even hire a few people. All of these things that were making our company so great couldn't be ignored just because the support load demanded it. So people decided to drop the bags they thought they could, drop the weight they thought they could in order to keep the balloon lifted. A ticket untracked there, a piece of documentation forgotten there, an orphan automation left on a branch over there. Now, I wish I could tell you that the impact of these choices was as isolated as it seems, but that would be a lie. During that time, our incident rate grew significantly, and it became clear we were not debugging our own thinking. We were not setting the time aside to ensure that there are some safeguard rails in place or that there are rollback plans set for particularly risky changes. What began like an innocent oversight snowballed into a series of tiring incident reports that only pushed our roadmap even further into the future. It became clear that we have to look deeper into our own assumptions and look beyond the existing suite of tests. So, at the beginning of 2024, our engineering managers took a leap of faith and asked across the department who would be willing to be part of a team that would maintain our main core product. That team would be responsible not only to keep the response time nice and low, but also over time shift its reactive nature to proactively dealing with most of the repetitive chores that we had going on. And so the Powerpuff Girls took birth. And I like the name as well, but trust me, there were still way too many boys in the team. But since I was leading it, I decided this is the name we're going for. We have worked in this formation for the past year, and while it hasn't always been easy, it's been proving to be the best solution to our problems. However, your experience supporting a mature product may be quite different. It's not the result of a secret incantation of the right people at the right time or with the right people, I guess. Your experience supporting a mature product is the result of the practices that you use in order to investigate and debug these issues. So with so much time on our hands to reflect on our lessons and goals, we have finally reconsolidated what are our fundamental practices for our support conglomerate. So for the remainder of this talk, I'm going to brush over them in the hope that they will inspire your agenda for this conference, where brilliant individuals are expanding on these topics far more than I do. I won't be calling out on anyone, but just for keeping things nice and tidy and intuitive, we're going to divide these practices in layers. We're going to call them reactive, adaptive, and proactive. But please bear in mind that these are mere guidelines. Not every component of your product needs to reach proactive levels. And even more importantly, you don't have to tick every single underlying box to consider yourself at one of those levels. The purpose of this classification is to make you identify potential blind spots in the way that you potentially conduct work with your team. Now, before we actually jump into the practices, I want to talk about a meta practice, which I find to be the most important. Team objectives. When we first started off as a team, we would take every single support request that would come our way and assess on the spot, learn on the spot, understand on the spot, how is the best way to reach a resolution. And we were working in that formation for about a month. And let me tell you, it felt chaotic. Not only because we couldn't really tell the rest of the organization how we were doing, but we could almost see the burnout entering the room, not even bothering to put their coat on a hanger. Moreover, because we couldn't really decide what we should do, the rest of the organization felt at home to make those decisions for us. So for several weeks, we were in a lot of negotiations with our senior management of what should our priorities be. I would advise anyone to stay at this level for as little as possible, just to avoid difficult conversations. Setting up team objectives may seem bland, corporate, soulless, especially if you align them with quantifiable metrics such as resolution time, lead time, number of tickets resolved. However, back in our first month, we would be so drowned in requests that we could barely take a step back and assess where we are as a team. Having our team objectives gave us a comforting layer of reassurance that the tickets that we are solving, as disparate as they may look like, they are pieces of a puzzle that are completing a big picture. Moreover, because we set our mission for ourselves, others could not debase our intentions with their own interpretation. By this point, you probably have faced a lot of issues, and you should have an educated understanding of the patterns that you find yourselves now and again. And you can separate them into distinct clusters. You can spend deliberate time brainstorming and debating what should be our practices, your practices, in order with how your business would best thrive. So it is these objectives that are surfacing the practices we're going to talk about today. And if any of them are bringing a twinkle into your eye, use today's opportunity to actually discuss how you are showing them at work. Now, practice number 1, a mindset of moderation, or do more with less. We are not here to work the hardest. We are not here to prove that we are constantly online or irreplaceable. We are here to set the standards of a great quality service where eventually every single anomaly is traceable to a cause with as little human intervention as possible. We are here for a good time, not a long time. So, as you begin your journey, only keeping things that bring you joy, you want to take your environment as it is and discuss with your stakeholders how do they interpret their system and how does it compare to your own interpretation. What are the most critical parts of your system? Do they know how to fail visibly and loudly? Are they covered by the right type of tests? Maybe take a few more steps back. Are you familiar enough with the product you're trying to defend? What are the most common user paths of your application? If a set of users are reporting a bug, do you have the right expertise in place to know whether you should have a turn in the road and fix it? Or can it be evaluated at a later time? Focus less on having an opinion at this point and listen to what the citizens of your city have to say. Engage your active listening. Ways in which you might consider doing that is by seeking training sessions from subject matter experts that do know your most critical parts of your product. Document unfamiliar parts of the service, even if it turns out that someone else has done a better job than you in the past 6 months ago. Not talking from own experience. Organize team days in which you and your team explore parts of the code base that they never had the chance to look into before. Analyze what are the most common entry points and how does it navigate through the entire repository. And lastly, have regular cross-team check-ins with the teams that are sharing the same code base as you. Chances are they have a pretty good idea of they have pretty good ideas of how they can improve the reliability of your service, but they never had the same time as you to actually implement them. Prove them you're there to make their wishes come true. If you engage in this type of knowledge transfers regularly, chances are you have assimilated a lot of insight and pain that teams before you have experienced before. And you have a few ideas of how you can actually implement solutions that could reduce the time necessary to investigate problems. But more importantly, you also know how to place them in such an obvious way that someone else can figure out what to do in your absence. So you add documentation right next to the most common error messages that you find. You create operational runbooks for the most repetitive chores that you find around. You use monitoring tools to build dashboards that surface the answers to the most common questions you find on support. And lastly, you reduce blind spots with 1% improvements, whether that is interactive playbooks, intentional tests. The choices are unlimited here. As you've been exposed to most parts of your service, most layers of your product by this point, you have a pretty good understanding how things are working, and you have the space to brainstorm ways in which you can recover from scenarios that haven't happened yet. And more interestingly, you can think of an escape plan. Can you completely eliminate yourself and others from the equation? You build solutions that can automatically recover from system failures. You soft impose standards of components that are just surfacing in the macro system that you have, not to reduce their autonomy, but just to give them a better lifeline. You facilitate workshops in which technical and non-technical individuals can figure out how to get answers to the questions that they might not even have yet. And lastly, you try to make onboarding such a smooth experience that new joiners would spend minimum amount of time to adjust to the new team, and they can build on top of your solutions. Practice number 2, over-collaborate and over-communicate. Don't let anyone doubt what is your purpose or what is your goals or your intentions, whether that is just communicating the progress of a simple ticket or communicating the progress of a goal. A visible developer in a visible team brings reassurance to the department and the business that you are setting in the direction it is expected of you. As an internal team, it may not feel as obvious, it may not feel as natural to be as loud as other product teams. But if the nature of your work is so unpredictable that you cannot have a roadmap, I would say try to make it as loud as possible. So in the incipient stages of this practice, you do let these problems come to you. You answer the support requests that are coming your way with the set priority. You don't do anything about it. You become available to unblock others from their common delivery tools that they're using, deployment pipelines, misconfigurations in the system, or simply chasing bugs in the wild. And lastly, while it may not be as obvious, it's safe to assume that the business will need to know how you're doing, how you're progressing, even at this stage. So use your regular channels of communication to basically report what lessons you have, what wins you have over the course of a regular cadence. For us, at the end of every month, we would share our wins and lessons in alignment with our business values and the soft promise of the things that we're going to look into next, with the natural caveat that things are subject to change. By now, you can make a better distinction between urgent matters and postponable investigations, and you can use that knowledge to create processes for self-remediation. So you're transparent about the dysfunctional practices within the team, and you make sure that the processes of remediation are being as transparent as possible. You promote a culture of risk assessment and ensure that rollback plans are in place for risky changes. And lastly, you can classify your support requests into high-level themes, and you can identify potential problematic areas of your service. And when it comes to taking your collaboration to an entirely new level, I found that looking at the engineering conglomerate from a social technical web perspective really helps emphasize the interrelatedness of the subsystems of an organization and the impact that an environment has on the organization itself. It really brings light to the fact that in order to understand and improve one part of the system, you really need input from all of the others. So these are some of the examples I found to be relatable, but there can be so many that are far more relatable to your context. But I do want to call out one of them, which is having a very public record of your standards. If you're anything like us, there can be times when days that have been spent on building a solution have been considered completely wasted because they were not adequate for our times back then. So having that record of standards really helps individuals have an informed decision whether they should have them in place, whether they should remove them, or they should improve them in some ways. Practice number 3, conduct your orchestra. As you grow into your role of overseeing, you become more aware of your power or privilege to conduct your orchestra in a better harmony. Common concerns and questions are becoming more obvious, and you are there to enable those channels of communication. So you intervene only a problem is escalated at this stage. You work with the observability you have in place, but you follow also the documentation and the tests you have in place. But once you feel more comfortable in your podium, you seek to validate whether your orchestra can make safe changes without your immediate intervention. You make it more visible when breaking changes are actually entering your system, and you share with others how they can self-remediate. At this point, the more each service is self-adjustable, the better. After several months of answering very similar product questions, you are in a position where we can finally consolidate a lot of the issues, a lot of the recurring problems that are happening in your system. And you are in a position where you consolidate them as opportunities for product development, for revenue growth, for better user experience, and even deprecating old functionalities. Lastly, you can confidently recognize that there can be certain knowledge gaps within your department, and you feel empowered to raise them in blameless environments for the benefit of the entire organization. The practices that you take on board might bring you anecdotal benefits, might even bring you the glory of a shiny new initiative at work, shiny new standard at work. But these 5 minutes of glory are just as nice and just as good as the next shiny initiative at work. The only way to really confirm if these practices were helpful to your business is to align them back with the team objectives you have initially set. So just like in every single anxiety-inducing situation, we are reminded to focus on our breathing. When dealing with the chaotic nature of support, it is very important to look back at the objective axis you have initially set in the beginning. We are used to considering support a very low-level, granular type of work filled with temporary annoyances. Designed to actually just distract us from the things that really matter, the roadmap. But I hope that our story can shed a different perspective on how supporting a mature product can be a very interesting art form, complicated art form, in which problems can share common behavioral patterns that haven't been questioned in a long time. So if I can close up with one piece of advice, it would be this. Your ultimate goal when supporting a mature product isn't to have impenetrable monitoring, telepathic communication, or self-writing documentation, although these days, it does sound nice. The priorities of the business will inevitably change, so it is the friends you make along the way and the lessons that you leave behind that should make all of this worth it. The true aim isn't just to have a team that can maintain a mature product, but to instill your quality standards to your future generations of engineers who will eventually take your baton. It is the manifesto you leave behind that should inspire new developers to race against the status quo, seek innovation and scalable solutions for their quotidian tasks. As cliché as it may sound, you have the power to transform your legacy and endless pursuit of operational excellence. Thank you. We have a few minutes. I'm happy to take questions here or off stage. Thank you.